Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chiseled. Why do we call it Chiseled? Because we're all work in progress. I'm your host, Rob Commodore. I'm also the author of the book Better Than You Think. And today I have a guest and a good friend of mine, Karl Miller from Lynchburg, Virginia. Is that correct? Did I get that right, Karl?
You got it, Rob.
So Karl is another friend of mine in the real estate world, and he is a hardworking guy. And there's something every time I talk to Karl, every time I see him, call him, see him in person, whatever the case is, I'll say, Karl, how you doing? And Karl, what's that response?
Hey, Rob, I'm blessed, man. It's good to see you, Rob. And I'm blessed.
I'm like, Karl was actually the inspiration to one of my chapters in the book called Blessings. The title of that chapter was Blessings. And it struck a chord with me that a lot of people will say, I'm doing okay, I'm doing great, or they'll whine, complain, or whatever the case may be. But Karl would consistently, every time I'd ask him, I'm a blessed man. I'm a blessed
Yeah.
man. So, Karl, I really appreciate that. And thank you for that inspiration. And so I'm going to ask you, why are you so blessed?
Oh man, Rob, are you kidding? We live in America, man. We live in the United States of America. We're so fortunate. Like we take the blessings we have surrounding us every day. We just take them for granted because it's just the environment we live in. It's kind of that old analogy of, a fish in the water is the last thing to realize it's in the water. And when you get out and travel outside of the United States and you see real poverty and you see opportunities that some of the hardest working people, you interviewed Scott Wurzbacher in the past, I believe, on this show, or we've been together. Scott Wurzbacher's a friend of mine. He was my climbing buddy in Tanzania. We were there earlier this year in February. And you go to a country like Tanzania and you realize that the average hardworking person is making $2 a day and will never get ahead economically. I'm reminded of when I was traveling years back. I was in Morocco, North Africa, and just the greatest hardworking taxi cab driver ever. It was a group of guys. We were hiking in the high Atlas Mountains, and he was taking us on a 10-hour trek to the city of Marrakesh. And we just had the greatest conversation in the van. And I remember asking him, hey, do you ever want to come and visit America? He's like, oh, I would love to go visit America. I said, you should just come. Just be flippantly, just off the top of my head, man, you should come visit us. And he got this sad look in his eyes. He says, I will never be able to come to America. And it not because of skills, not because of a lack of emotional intelligence or English speaking. He literally has no money, right? And it's stuff we take for granted that if you don't have money, you can find a way to make money here in America. Just for example, my goodness, you travel outside and you realize how blessed we are that we can take our talent, skills, and abilities. We can grow, we can get better. And honestly, the resources that are surrounding us and the ability to gather those resources with just doing things right, it's unbelievable. It's unprecedented.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that piece. And while you mentioned the word travel, you talked about Scott Wurzbacher, the hike that you did to Kilimanjaro, right?
Right.
Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got to imagine, because you had asked me to go on that hike, and it unfortunately couldn't work out for me because I would love to go on there. And I just envisioned this incredible journey. And I know it was probably tough too, but what was it like when you got to the top of that mountain?
Oh man, it was pretty emotional. It was an emotional event just to get to the summit because you work really hard to get there. And I've experienced emotions like that and doing other hard things physically, whether it's, running an ultra. I know you got a son that did an Ironman recently, and you see the emotion that hits you when you accomplish a big goal like that. And this was something that we worked up for. But I actually got a hold. This is a different topic, but we did some reflection time. What are 10 life lessons we learned about climbing Kilimanjaro? And one of those things that I learned was when you do hard things, and you put the effort in and do hard things, and then when you hit that reward, it's a pretty powerful moment. And of course, the air is thin, so our brains were a little muddled up there. But I'll tell you what, that was pretty amazing. That sun was up by then, and we had climbed all night, and just getting to the summit of that really high mountain and the breathtaking beauty of God's creation, just being at the top of the highest mountain in Africa. Yeah, that's something that's kind of hard to put into words. It was a very emotional moment. It's something you had to be there for, Rob.
Yeah, and I can see the glow on your face because I'm seeing Karl on the screen here, and I was going to ask you about that, like the view. So yeah, it was hard work. Yeah, it was a big goal when you got to it, but it was like, and I bring this up as far as this blessing piece because you got to that top of the mountain, and I envisioned what it might look like. So, and I wasn't there, obviously, but when you got there, was there just like this awness about it?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so. It's almost a spiritual experience. You put the effort in, and then it's just kind of hard to describe. And honestly, I had a kind of a moment when I was hiking up that on the mountain, because you hike all night. It was really cold. It was windy, and it's not an easy thing to do. And it was probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun, it was maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. Sun wasn't up yet. It wasn't daylight. And I remember just sitting on this rock, and I think just putting the effort in, and I was having trouble getting enough oxygen, and just sitting on a rock. And I remember just sort of, I didn't intend to start crying, but my shoulders just started shaking. Next thing I'm just bawling, like I'm just crying, man. And my guide came over and said, Carl, you okay? It's like, yeah. And he's checking my headband to make sure that, I'm not too tight and not getting a headache, because I did have a little headache. And I just remember, like, man, why am I crying? But I think just the emotion of, wow, I can't believe I'm actually here. I'm doing this with my friends, and we're going to be on top of Africa, in a few hours, because I wasn't going to quit. And it
Yeah.
hurt, but I was, was going to keep going, and just the emotion of it just kind of hit me. And it's like I said, it's kind of hard to describe, Rod.
Well, I get it though. I do get it, Carl, because like I was back in September. A couple friends of mine, we went to the Grand Canyon, and we took a hike down there. And I had dropped my phone. I told the story to somebody before, but I dropped my phone. It broke the day we get there, and I want to take all these pictures, and I can't take the pictures.
Oh
And I'm
yeah,
like, okay, God wants me to see the canyon through the lens of my eyes, not the lens of my phone. And I remember, doing the hike without my phone and camera and all that. And I go down, and we hike down 7.5 miles. We hike back up 7.5 miles. And I remember my buddy said to me, he goes, Rob, what did you get out of that climb, that hike? And Carl, I broke down and got emotional.
mm-hmm.
And I'm like, like you said, it's hard to explain. But I
Yeah,
said this, and this might sound crazy for the folks listening, but I was like, if this is just a little bit of what heaven's like, I can't wait
yeah,
to die, right? Because I can't wait to
yeah.
see all that.
Right. And man, I'm so glad you shared that, because sometimes we get so attached to our devices, and we just don't know how to unplug anymore. Like, cell phones have only been around, what, 20 years or a little bit more than that. But, it's only become commonplace in the last 15, 20 years. And man, we just have a hard time detaching. And I think sometimes when we just detach and we just listen to nature, we listen to creation, we listen to the voice of God intentionally, like it doesn't take much to get me kind of emotional, Rob. So, but I mean, I feel like that's kind of what we've lost in society. I think it's really, really good to be intentionally just unplugging and just getting out in nature. And anyway, I love being outside and experiencing those types of
That's good stuff.
experiences.
This wasn't, obviously this wasn't planned. This is part of the conversation, but it's all about blessings, and that is a blessing. You
Yes,
were blessed. I was blessed.
yes,
It's all
yep,
about the blessing. So, Carl,
yeah.
Carl was very young, and he had an incident that occurred, and it was a tough thing that he went through, and I wanted to share a little bit because I think a lot of blessings came
Yep.
from that, and it was a very early age. How old were you, Carl, when
Yeah.
that?
So I grew up. I grew up on. I'm the firstborn of 5 children. I grew up on a dairy farm and I was born in Augusta County, Virginia. And I kind of come from an Amish Mennonite background. My grandfather on both my mom and my dad's side were Amish. In fact,
Wow, I didn't know.
and
That's
my
great.
grandfather on my mom's side, he was an Amish blacksmith. And when my mom was 6 years old, he'd been reading the scriptures, and he was very convinced that you could have assurance that you could have assurance of salvation. And the Amish believe that you do the best you can. And he got into a spat with his bishop and said, I know when I die, I'm going to heaven. And the bishop was like, no, you hope you're going to go to heaven. And throughout all that, my grandfather left the Amish church, and he got into the Mennonite culture. What my parents met through that culture. And I actually was born in that culture in Stuart Draft, Virginia. So dairy farm, hard work. My dad had an 8th grade education, but he knew how to farm. That's what he grew up on. And so here I am working on the farm, and living on the farm and I was 2 years old, Rob. And my dad and grandfather were working on this lime spreader machine. They had it pulled in. Tractor was pulled into the shop, and so in the rear of this machine was all these chain and sprocket reducer gears. And I'm playing around outside the yard, and I get over to the machine, and I'm just playing around back there, and all the chain and sprocket gears reduced. And I don't remember how this happened, but I ended up having my hands on these chain mechanisms, and they had just put this machine back together, and they cranked it up, and both of my hands got caught in these chain and sprocket reducer gears. And it chewed the fingers right off my right hand. I do have my
Mm,
thumb, got my thumb on my right hand, but I lost the 4 fingers. I have a little stub on my right hand. Thank God I still have my left hand.
yeah.
My left fingers were pinched really badly, but I'm fully restored. No issues on my left hand. But my right hand had 4 fingers amputated at 2 years old, 2.5 years old.
Wow. So now you're 2 years old, and like some people say, well, you really don't know what you don't know. At 2 years old, that's pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Like did you carry that with you for a while?
You know, I think humans are young kids are so resilient, and they can just bounce back and overcome everything. So literally, it was all I knew, right? I mean, I was in the hospital for a few months, and I shouldn't say a few weeks, I should say, and skin grafts and physical therapy, and in bandages for the next 6 months. But I remember parts of this. I remember as a 2.5, 3 year old, 2.5 year old kid, just having to soak my hand, doing these bandage wraps and all this stuff. But I really don't remember pain, and I don't remember. Uh, I just don't remember like having to struggle with that because your body just adapts. And long story short, fast forward 2 years, my hand's fully healed. I'm a 5-year-old kid. You know, everything's good. And then my family moved to Campbell County, Virginia, just south of Lynchburg, where I live now. And my dad bought a farm down there. And I grew up working on the farm, man. I mean, I grew up feeding the calves at 6:30 in the morning before I went to school. As a first and second grader. That's just what you did. You worked on the farm. So looking back, man, I mean, I'll say this: I hated farm life, and it wasn't that I despised the work. I didn't mind working hard. I just didn't enjoy working with animals. I didn't really enjoy the farm life. My dad and I were always spatting, it seemed like, in my teen years, and so when I was 16, I got into construction world. But back to your question, no, I don't think it really slowed me down too much because your body learns how to adapt. I mean, I see these soldiers coming back from war missing a leg or missing limbs, and I'm in awe of them because they were used to having that limb be a functioning part of their body. But for me, it's all I know. And like I said, my little thumb, man, you learn how to adapt and get around pretty quick. And it didn't really slow me down too much.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah. So then we were talking about in an earlier conversation, going through all this, the trauma of it all, but
Yeah.
you being this tough guy, and I don't mean tough guy in an ego sense. You're just a
Right.
tough, resilient guy. And you
Yeah.
had said to me, "There's nothing I can't overcome, or there's nothing human beings can't overcome."
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, you and I, we've heard speakers that are missing more limbs than 4 fingers, just
Yeah,
how
we have.
incredible they are and the way they can inspire people. So when I was a teenager, though, I really struggled. I was really, because you are who you are, right? You just learn how to grow. But then I think a 12-year-old kid, about the time they start to hit puberty, they become more self-aware. And I remember in 5th grade, it was the first time I kind of really sort of struggled with my identity a little bit because, these other kids were, 5th graders can be kind of cruel sometimes. And I remember, kind of being a little bit of being made fun of. And it just hit me like for the first time. And all of a sudden, every teenager goes through this anyway, right? Whether it's acne or all of a sudden their ears are too big or whatever the case may be.
Curly hair, frizzy hair.
Yeah, absolutely. God, yeah. I mean, guys go through it again. Girls it's even worse, right? So,
Yeah.
so I remember hitting those teenage years and just being incredibly insecure. And if you'd met me back then, Rob, you wouldn't. I'm a different guy. I mean, I didn't talk to people. I kept my hands in my pockets. I was really embarrassed about,
Mm-hmm.
this deformity that I had. This no fault of my own, but it was just something I lived with, and I was very, very shy. I remember going through driver's ed in Virginia, and I was 15, and I'm taking driver's ed, and the teacher made us all go outside, and we had to change a tire. And I remember trying to change a tire with one. Now, when I'm using both my hands, it's no problem, man. Oops, my thumb is sorry, mic drop there. My thumb is, I can do tools. I mean, shoot, I worked up on a farm, growing up, fixing things all the time. But I was just so embarrassed about letting kids see my hand that I was trying to change this tire one-handed, which of course made things even more awkward. So,
it's all good there, right? I thought did you give him a thumbs up?
I was so embarrassed, man. But you know what happened? So here's what happened. So when I was, and I grew up in a family of faith. So,
and that's what I wanted to get into because you had said something to me about that, and I was going to ask you: Have you always were you always this guy that was blessed, or was there something that happened that said you made you start thinking that way?
Well, so yeah, the answer is I was blessed. I just didn't realize it, right? I mean, I had two parents who loved me. I mean, they did the best they could for me, and and again, my parents have shortcomings, but oh my gosh, they truly loved me. They love Jesus and they love me, and there was never any doubt that my parents loved. In fact, my dad. I just so much respect for him because you think about it as a father going through seeing your 2-year-old son, have his fingers chewed off in a farm accident because you weren't paying attention and looking, before you cranked up a machine. Can you imagine just the guilt and the just the pain that went with that, right? So my dad had to work through a lot of trauma, just as a young dad, because I mean he was 20 years old when I was born, so here he is, this 23-year-old, 22-year-old guy, So so I didn't understand that part of the story until I became a father myself and talking to my dad years later about, just how traumatic that was for him. But fast forward to when I was 16 and I, my dad and I, we were butting heads all the time, but he took us, all of us, our family, to a speaker. We went to this kind of this conference, this spiritual conference, and the speaker there was talking about things in your life and how, God allows circumstances and things in your life to shape you, and there's every single person has something in their life that's unchangeable. Actually, there's a whole pile of things that we have in our lives that are unchangeable. And so in speaking to youth group, when I was a youth, was, you can't change how many siblings you have or who they are. You can't change the fact if you were born a male or female. You can't change your height or the color of your eyes. You can't change any physical defects that you're dealing with or handicaps. And of course, that was the one that hit me like a ton of bricks. And you can't change who your parents are or the country you were born into. So just all these things, right, that are just unchangeables in your lives. And it's those unchangeables and things that can be.
Carl, you got to repeat that. You blanked out for a second. Go ahead.
Where did I cut off at?
Something about the unchangeables, I think you said.
All right. So the unchangeables, like every one of us have unchangeables in our life, right? So we have, whether the things that we can't change, like what country you were born into, how many siblings you have,
right,
your height, your eye color, all this stuff, right? So the very thing that are unchangeable, those are the things that you might be most embarrassed about or that's a pain point for you. But those are the very things that can be a blessing and or inspiration to others. If you will just let God take those unchangeables and embrace them and just accept them for who you are, because God allowed those unchangeables in your life for a reason. And so those are the things that can inspire others and bless others.
So it's about accepting those unchangeables.
Yeah. And so, I just remember like he just encouraged everybody to thank God for the very things that are unchangeables that you don't like about yourself. Right.
Yeah. And so in that, because we were talking about that, and you said something, you alluded to it, I think you blanked out a little bit, but it was like, you said something about out of your biggest pain points comes what?
Out of your biggest pain points, or embarrassments in your life comes the inspiration for others, or comes the very story that will inspire or will bless others.
And so why do you think, and I know it might be common sense to some people, why do you think people can't see that? Because they're so sucked into the woe is me or why me, instead of saying, how can I use this to be an inspiration to others?
Yeah, well, man, Rob, it's a good question. But here's the thing, I'm a man of faith. I know you are as well. And there's a scripture that says that the enemy seeks to destroy, right? And so if the enemy, whether, Satan, the devil, just gets in there and just, wants to destroy people, right? He's an enemy of God, and he's going to destroy the very people that God loves with self-doubt and all of that stuff. So I think that's a part of it. I think there is a spiritual warfare going on. But I think that, it's a good question. I think that if we can open up our eyes and just seek higher learning and seek truth and just seek, what God wants of our lives, but then also just lean into just all the wealth of knowledge and science. You talked about being blessed. How cool is it that we can read?
Yeah,
how cool is it that we have the ability to read and take in information and learn and grow and get better every single month and every single year? So I think that just reading books and just kind of taking in wisdom and having mentors that could speak truth into my life, all were things that helped me. So I don't know, people that hold on to that stuff, I think there's a sense of pride, man. It takes humility to sort of humble yourself enough to open your mind to be thankful for the very things that, that cause pain in your life.
Well, and I think it's also I don't want to say an obligation, an opportunity for somebody like you or me to be mentors for other people, to help them see how that stuff could be a blessing. And you've had experience going to some camps and hanging out with kids for several years, right?
Yeah, I did. So when I was 18, and again, like I said, faith was a big part of the family I grew up in. And there was a speaker that came to our church, and he was talking about how we're all called to go. We're all called to go into the world and speak truth, right? So, and he said, the reality is, if you got an opportunity to go somewhere and you're saying that you're waiting for God to tell you to go, he says, forget that, just go, because he's already said go. He says, go into the nations, right? So I had the opportunity to work at a camp in northwestern Ontario, and this was with the First Nations, tribal people, the First Nations groups. And man, Rob, I went up there in the summer of 1994, and my eyes were open because we did this long float plane flight up to this little island, this little reservation. We drove to where the road ended, got on a dock, this float plane landed, picked us up, and we flew like 2.5 hours up to Big Trout Lake, Ontario. Look it up on the map. It is way up there.
Uh-huh.
we landed on this island. We were working with this pastor with these kids, and they were doing like this summer Bible school, and we were selling Bibles and Christian books and stuff. So we're up there, man, and my eyes were open to just a different mindset, because these kids, these First Nations kids, 12, 13 years old, suicide is rampant up there. And what happens is these kids will get made fun of, or they'll run into a hardship in their life, and they'll take their own life. And then they observe, the friends of this kid will observe the whole village coming together for 3 days, just mourning these kids. And all they say is what a great kid this was. And it's like, they get attention after they are dead. And so there's just this culture, and suicide's just rampant. And I remember playing with these kids. We were out, I don't know, we were playing baseball or something with these kids. And of course they were fascinated by my hand, right? And I'm holding the bat with my thumb, and I would play baseball, and I'd hold a glove in my left hand, but then I'd rip my glove off and throw left-handed, when I'm throwing the ball. And of course it was a conversation starter for these kids, and they all wanted to touch my hand, and I would pinch them really hard because I've got a really strong thumb, and they just loved it. I called it my lobster claw, and they just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I would never forget it, man. There was this like 13-year-old boy, and we just kind of had a little conversation, man. And he's like, Karl, he's like, why didn't you just commit suicide when people made fun of you? He asked me, did people make fun of you? I said, yeah. He's like, why didn't you just go commit suicide? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, well, because God loves me, man, and God has a plan for me. And you know what? He said, and I told him this too. I said, the things you don't like about you, God can take those and make you an inspiration too, man. And I just remember like just sort of hitting me like, oh my gosh, like here's this culture where these kids are taking their own lives when they run into hardship. And I mean, again, how blessed am I that I'm around this teaching and this growth and just this spiritual part of life where I can see past that, right? Because those kids didn't have that, man.
No, they didn't. But you gave it to them in that moment. You gave it to them, and it goes back to your quote. And with your out of your biggest pain points can become your biggest inspirations.
Right.
And for a kid or a group of kids or youngsters that are thinking that way, and it's the norm, you get made fun of, and you struggle, and you go do that, and you sit there and you say, well, look, man, I didn't do that, and this is what you need to do. And it's what you can be. And I just think I got a little choked up when you're telling that story. And it's just amazing that, so it's like out of your accident or your trauma, you became an inspiration to something. You might have saved that kid's life for all we know.
Yeah, never know. I mean, never talked to him again. I was up there for a week and gone. So, but so I did that 4 summers in a row. I worked up there and with the First Nations kids, summer camps, and just different Bible schools and stuff. And it was so much fun. But you're right, Rob. You get to know these kids you're just getting to know them. Day 5 and then day 6 they're going home again, right? Back into some very challenging situations. And that kind of inspired me to work at a year-round boys camp school in South Carolina, where these kids were having trouble with home and school, and the whole goal was get them home so they could be successful with their parents. And so, here I'm at this point, probably 22 years old, and I'm hoping to be this inspiration. Of, man, I tell you, I learned so much, man. I learned that I was the one who needed to be at a year-round camp, and those were some of the hardest work I ever did in my life, man. We literally lived in the woods 5 days a week, and I got off 48 hours, and then we were back in there again. But I mean, we would start with the most basic of things. There's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way of doing things. And we would start with just sleeping out the tents in the morning and stacking your shoes, tallest to shortest. And, we had 2 rules at camp. Everything we do as a group, and everything we do with a good attitude. And so when a kid had a bad attitude or was acting up, the whole group would stop. And we would stop and we would evaluate. We would identify the problem. We'd come up with a solution, and then we'd execute on it. And the whole mantra of camp was you planned, you set goals, you executed, and then you evaluated at the end of the day. And we would start our 6-week sessions that way. We'd start our weeks that way. We'd start a day that day. So we were constantly setting a goal, executing, evaluating. And it was there that I started to learn the power of a written goal.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I like what you said because, this podcast is chiseled. It's all because we're a work in progress. It's all about us getting better as people. But and it's not really, you could say it's not a business podcast. But in a sense, what you said there, we do everything as a group. And we do everything with a good attitude. You take that into the corporate world. You take that as an entrepreneur in your business and whatnot. We do everything as a group. And we do everything as a good attitude. And I like what you said, if somebody had a bad attitude or something happened, you stopped.
Yep.
And evaluated that. I just learned something from you just now, just from that.
Yeah.
And you just blessed me.
Well, I'll tell you, camp is hard. It's the toughest 2 years of my life. And I was volunteering as it's all, it was funny. They had to pay us minimum wage, but the agreement was you would turn to give all your check back except for like $200 to kind of, we had food, shelter, clothing, right? So we had this little house that all of us counselors, they call us chiefs, lived in, on our weekends. We had some great times, but I was broke as a rope, man. But those are some of the best 2 years of my life. And honestly, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned about that, it's not the leader that makes everything happen. It's the group, man, and so the reason camp worked is because as those kids were getting ready to graduate, they were helping the new kids come in and just learning the culture and learning what it takes. And then when a group member would step up and be that leader and he was being the influence, then he was ready to go home. And that camp in South Carolina had the highest success rate of any facility, for trouble kids in all of the whole state of South Carolina. And they're still going today. And it's just an amazing organization. Fair Play Wilderness Boys Camp School, if you want to check it out. So.
Yeah. What's the name of it again?
So it's based out of Westminster, South Carolina. It's called Fair Play. That was the name of the town where it originated. Fair Play Wilderness Boys Camp School.
There you go. Well, so Karl, in those years you did work at the camps, how many kids or youngsters would you say you were connected with?
Oh my gosh. Hundreds. I don't know. Like the summer camps would be hundreds, but again, it's a very brief window. They're there for a week and they're gone again. And then the boys camp school year round, we never had more than 10 kids in our group, but I probably was a chief to maybe 18 kids in the 2 years I was there, maybe 18 to 20 kids. I still stay in touch with some of them, actually.
Do you really? That's yeah. And why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, it's so funny. I got to meet one of my former campers. I say one of my former campers. He came down he was in Virginia between Christmas and New Year's. He lives in New York City. And man, we just had a great talk. He said, man, camp saved my life. You have no idea. Camp saved my life. If it wouldn't have been for camp, I would definitely be in jail and I'd probably be dead.
That's a powerful statement, Karl, because that's just one guy. Yeah. And you were connected with, you said hundreds of guys and 18 more, I guess, intimately in some sense of the word there.
Yep.
And if you saved one guy, maybe you saved a lot more. Maybe you blessed 200-400 kids. And in the process, you were blessed as well. Is that right?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt about it. Oh, I learned and grew so much. Camp makes everyone better. And that's why I have such a heart for camp ministries because, these kids get into the environment. Like we talked about earlier, Rob, it's like when you get away from your cell phone, right, and just get out in nature, camp is one of those things that takes people out of their comfort zone. You get into a different environment. You become open to learn in a different way and hear things in a different way. And, so now, fast forward, here we are 20 years later, and, we get into the mundane and the helping people and serving people. But I try to keep that same mentality. Look, man, we've been blessed with so much, and how can I bless others? How can I help? We're in the real estate world. How can we help our clients just make a good informed decision so that there's no regrets 6 months from now, or so that they could say with confidence, look, we did the best we could with what we had, and we overcame the challenge. I think going through what I went through growing up on the farm, is that whenever there's a challenge or there's a more difficult way of doing things, because if you don't have 4 fingers on your hand and you got to pull a lever a certain way or use a certain tool, you adapt and you just figure out a way to overcome the challenges. And I think sometimes in my world now, helping buyers and sellers get to the finish line, you find ways to think creatively and to overcome the obstacles in ways that, because this isn't the first time I've had to overcome an obstacle, right? So, okay, let's figure out, let's get through this, So I think that, the life experiences I had as a kid, probably has made me a stronger person, a more creative person. And it certainly has made me more determined and more tenacious in getting things done.
Yeah, because we talked about it. I mean, Karl's got a very successful business. He's a radio show host. He's got his own brokerage. He does very well in Lynchburg, Virginia. And if anybody's looking to go down there, you want to look this guy up because he's not just a great person. He's a great businessman, and he's just a salt of the earth type of guy. And he had this grand opening a couple of years ago, and myself and I guess 7, 8 other guys, we know Karl from throughout the country. We went down to support him and watch him open up this thing. So that was a huge, huge thing for him because we'll go to touch on that. It's like you talked about, you learned about setting goals, and you set a goal to open up your own brokerage, right?
Yeah, I did. And it's funny. I wrote a goal down, and I actually kind of forgot I wrote it down. And as I was going through some old workbooks right before we had that grand opening, man, I found a book I'd written. So I opened up that brokerage in 2020, and I found a goal I'd written in 2015, and it said, in 5 years, 2020, open up a brokerage. And I kind of forgot it was even there, Rob. And I was like, oh
Wow.
my gosh, like here, and we, this was all planned. It was all coming together. It's like, oh my gosh, So yeah, so setting goals, right? I mean, that's something that, you're a goal setter. I tend to do that. And sometimes I forget, I write them down and I don't keep them in front of me like some people do. But I am a big person about thinking about what I want to do next, and then just putting up a vision board, putting up something in writing. And if I have it in front of me, it's going to happen.
And that's that determination that just came out of Carl. Like he said, if I have it written down, it's going to happen. And
if
so
I keep it in front of me, I forgot all my goals done. But if I write it down, keep it in front of me, and deciding what to do. I think a big part of goal setting, Rob, is just sort of deciding. It's like once you make up your mind and you decide you're going to do it, then it gets done. But a lot of it is just a mental. We like. It's so funny. I just had dinner with my wife tonight, and we were talking about. There's a race that I'd like to do. It's a tough one. It's called the it's called the Hellgate 100. It's a 100K race. It's called the Hellgate 100. It's here in Virginia, and it's a tough race. It starts at midnight on a Friday night, the second weekend in December, and the weather can be just awful.
The second weekend in December, you said?
Yeah, and it starts at midnight. So those are long nights, right?
Yeah.
So I have a lot of friends who did it, and I told my wife, I said, I'd like to say that I've done it, but I don't want to put the work in. But I said, someday I'm gonna just do it. But I know when I do this, I'm gonna be training like crazy, because this is not something you just wake up and do. You got to put a lot of work into it. So I think I say that story to just simply say a lot of times about goal setting is you really just got to make up your mind, because when you made up your mind, then it becomes easy. If you're on a diet trying to lose 20 pounds, and the waiter comes around asking if you'd like some ice cream or like dessert, no, you've already made up your mind. You just ate your salad or your tuna or whatever, your healthy food. No, the answer is no. You're not going to take any sugar drinks. You're not going to eat dessert, right? Because you've made up your mind. And I think that's a big part of it, just having that mindset. But once you have that mindset, it helps to hit the goal. You got to be committed to it.
It was okay. So that was my next thing there, because Brian Buffini, one of the guys, the coaching company that
our mentor,
our mentor we're part of, he's got a podcast himself, and he did one. It's called The Power of the Made Up Mind.
Oh, it was a good one.
Yeah, and you made me think of that. But you also said, and I would encourage anybody to listen to that. So it's Brian Buffini. It's a Good Life podcast, and The Power of the Made Up Mind. So I highly encourage people to listen to that. But making up your mind that's the decision piece. I made up my mind to do this, right? And then you said the next word, commit. So you got to make the decision, and then you got to commit to it, because a lot of people might decide to do something, but they didn't make the commitment. And that's where that power, that made up mind, I made up my mind to do it, but am I going to commit to doing it? And that takes me to the P90X thing, if anybody's familiar with that. Their mantra was decide, commit, succeed. So that's a formula. Decide, commit, and succeed.
And it's the same thing in business, Rob. I mean, what you just said there, it's the same thing as having an appointment. If you've got an appointment with, let's say you're trying to get into a specialist for a doctor's appointment, and finally they can get you in at 3:00 on Tuesday, and it's 45 days away, right? You're going to be there at 3:00 on Tuesday, 45 days later. So you've made up your mind you're going to that. And I think that the same thing is so true for us as self-employed people, because it's so easy to put a block out in your calendar, but then just to blow it off, right? Okay, I'm going to do the hard thing and make 20 phone calls to people I haven't talked to in a long time between 2:00 and 4:00. And for me, it's really, really easy not to commit to that, right? So 2:00 comes around, and it's like, oh, well, I've got an opportunity to go have lunch with one of my friends I haven't seen in a while, or whatever. So you got to really commit to doing the thing, whatever it is, and just committing to it, right? And I think that's a big part of it. You just show up, and then not just show up, but then you're efficient with the goals and with the appointments and the calendar that you have. And I think as business owners, it's really, really easy sometimes to not do the hard things. But if you're going to run a successful business, you got to commit to doing the things that aren't fun to do.
And through those hard things, I think you would agree with me, many blessings come.
Man, that is so true. Yeah, that's where the rewards come, man.
Yeah, but the question is, when we're about to do that hard work, or when people are about to do that hard work and they don't want to do it, can they see the blessings in advance? And I think if more people could sit there and reflect a little bit and think about the blessings in advance, that might be more of an inspiration. Say, let's go commit to do this thing. Let's go. And I'm guilty, by the way. I'm guilty as anybody.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's why you see, I mean, you're a sports guy. I love sports as well, but you see athletes get incredibly emotional sometimes after they win the championship, and they've put in all the hard work. But man, what people don't see, all they see is the winning and the goal that wins the championship, right? Or the block that stops the opposing team from winning the championships, and the emotion that comes out of that. But man, the emotion comes from the hours and hours and hours and hours of grind that happened to get them to that point. Like nobody is at that level on national TV without incredible amounts of practice, and
Yeah.
that's the stuff nobody sees. And and so people don't become successful or get where they are in life in a place that others are envious of them by accident. The
Yeah,
majority of
I
the time,
agree
there's
with
a
you.
lot of work that goes in it nobody sees, and the people just keep showing up. You just keep showing up.
So I'm going to ask you this question, Carl. The there's a lot of people that that have blessed you in your life, correct?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Do you have any idea how many people you've been a blessing to?
No, I don't. I guess I haven't thought about that, Rob. It's a great question.
Yeah.
I, yeah, it's so funny you say that because I'm always trying to learn and grow from others, but you're right. I'm 46 years old now, and I'm becoming more aware of the opportunities to inspire others. And man, it's so funny. I was just in church 2 weeks ago, right? And I ran into a guy. I haven't seen him in a long time. We used to run together. He's got a corporate job and kids. You know how it is. We get
Yeah.
we get separated a little bit, but I hadn't seen him in like 2-3 years, and we just had this great conversation about a podcast that we both listened to, and we just started like rattling off all these cool things, and it's so funny because he's like, man, you recommended a book a long time ago that I read, and man, I never really thanked you for it. It was a book that's called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, and he wrote a book, and he wrote a book about just daily choices, right? And so it's so funny. You kind of do these things in passing, and you kind of live on your life, and you're probably right because I mean, there's people that blessed me that probably have no idea they blessed me. So, Rob, that's a good question.
Yeah, so it's not really our business to know how many people we bless. It's not an ego thing, but I think in knowing that we are blessing people, that inspires us to keep going. That inspires us to keep getting better and being better. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's also just a good reminder about the times when you're not in a good mood, or or you're making bad choices. Just how much of a burden your life can be to others too, right? I mean, yeah. So I mean, we all have people in our lives that just aren't good for us, right? So it's just a matter of. I think you and I were talking the other day about how I don't take financial advice from my family because, or at least some of my extended family, because there's just a negative mindset there about people who have means and who have money, and it's just ingrained in their culture and their mindset, and they're never going to change, and that's okay. I just don't hang out with them, and I don't ask them money advice.
But Carl's the guy that gives the money advice because he can. Hey, Carl,
Well,
so I do got to ask this question. So, is your father still alive?
oh yeah, he is. Oh yeah.
So, and have you guys ever like gone back and talked about this thing?
Oh
What
yeah,
happened?
yeah, we have, and yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I think probably we've had some breakthroughs in our relationship. Like I told, we really butted heads a lot. And after I got out of the camp as a young adult that I worked at in South Carolina, I was probably 20, been 23 or 24 years old with that canoe trip together up in the boundary waters of Minnesota, and my two youngest brothers, my dad and I, and we had some great talks out there, out in the wilderness. And I learned that I'd always thought when this incident happened that my dad had no idea I was outside. Well, he knew. He'd kind of seen me playing around the yard, and he just carried that guilt. Like if I'd have just walked around to the back, just made sure that my son wasn't in the shop, right? So all these regrets, and I learned about a conversation that my dad had with my mom. I was visiting the hospital, and this happened over Christmas of 1979. So it's Christmas season, and he told my mom, I will never forgive myself for what I did. And you think about just carrying the burden of that. Again, as a young adult, I mean, he was, like I said, 20, low 20s, and so I just gained a new appreciation of the trauma. And it made a lot of sense. If my dad kind of carried that for years and decades, and I hope he knows that he totally is forgiven, and God's forgiven him, and he can forgive himself. But it's interesting how I think he just had a hard time just accepting himself and then accepting me for that. And so it was not that long ago, he told me, he says, man, I just want to let you know, Carl, I'm really proud of you. And he had never told me that before. Right. So I take a lot of solace in the fact that, my dad is this rock of a guy, and, but he's still learning, he's still growing, he's still a humble guy. And he's just, and it just gives me inspiration that my dad in his 60s now, is still learning and growing. And it's just an inspiration because, we can learn and grow, whether we're 30 years old, 60 years old, 80 years old, right? You never stop getting better if you choose not to, right? There's always things you can learn and get better at.
That's awesome. And they, you said, you talk about your dad saying he's proud of you, and like you said, I hope he knows he's forgiven. I mean, a couple of thoughts come to mind. Like, have you? I mean, you didn't. I may be out of line saying this, but you didn't. Have you ever seen Dad, I forgive you? Not that you needed to. I mean, because it wasn't like you did it on purpose. But like, because I was going to say, because if he doesn't know, we're going to send him his podcast, and he's going to know.
He's a good man. We almost lost him during COVID. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. It was a really scary time at the end of 2020. And thank God he came back. He's fine now. He's still driving truck, and he's doing well. So
that's awesome.
I should probably see him more often. It's one of those things you take relationships for granted sometimes.
Well, we do. But when he said he was proud of you, in that moment, have you ever thought about the fact that he says, "I'm proud of you"? He saw you as a blessing to him.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it's interesting. We kind of learn from sometimes the mistakes of our older generation. So I'll give you another quick dad story. One of the things my dad was really modeled for me was when he was wrong and he would just lose his top, whatever. He would yell at the kids, whatever. When he calmed down, he would come back and he would say, "I'm sorry." He would apologize. He was really quick to, if he made a mistake, and he would own it. Right. And that's something that I learned from my dad. And so one of the things that, as I worked with these boys, right, there was a lot of missing dads, a lot of missing relationships. And I just remember, like, when I had my son is 16 now, I just decided, look, my son's going to hear, "I love you and I'm proud of you," every day. And when he was a boy, I would tuck him in at bed. I was like, "Josh, just want to let you know, man, I love you and I'm proud of you." And my daughter, the same thing. "Audrey, I love you and I'm proud of you." So I just really was intentional about telling those kids that. And so, because my dad didn't tell me that, but his dad never told him ever.
Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my dad took those things that he was missing in his life. He modeled it. Now, he did the best he could, right? And the culture he was in and all that. And then here I am doing better. And man, I just hope my son and daughter are way better than me, because I've got a lot of shortcomings when it comes to, to relationships. So, but we all can get better, right? Every generation can get better.
That's why we're all work in progress, right?
Well, we're all getting chiseled, Rob. That's why I listen to your podcast,
Well, I thank you. Well, look, going forward here, how much more chiseling got going on for you?
Oh, gosh. If you ask my wife, there's just a little block, which is a few quarters, rounded off a little bit, Rob. There's a lot of progress that needs to happen in the life of Karl Miller. I can tell you that.
Well, the good news is it's only 4 minutes before halftime for you. If 100 years is the time frame, right? So you got a second half to go, my friend.
That's the goal, and I can't wait. Can you imagine, Rob, if we could go back to age 20, having the wisdom and the experiences in our minds that we have now, in our 40s and 50s, just how much bigger of an impact we can make. So I think it's important that you talked about mentorship, right? It's important that we, do everything we can to the people that are ready. To pass on the wisdom that we've learned, just like, Brian Buffini's done for us, just like the people in our life have done for you and I. It's a good reminder. So it's been good chatting with you, man, about this.
You too. And you've passed a lot of wisdom on all of us today and the listeners here. I'm sure they're going to be grateful for this. So that said, if somebody wanted to get a hold of Karl Miller, how would they do that?
Yeah, I tell you, we've got a company website, karlmillerrealty.com, karlmillerrealty.com. You can contact us there. You can also feel free to email me directly. It's Karl with a K, Karl at karlmillerteam.com, Karl at karlmillerteam.com.
Karl, thank you so much for being on here today. Thank you for blessing me. Thank you for blessing the listeners, and just understand and realize how much of a blessing you are to others, and you've been to others, and keep being that guy you are, and just keep sharing those blessings, my friend. I appreciate you so much, and I'm honored to have you on here.
Well, Rob, thank you. And thank you for writing the book you did too. I know you put hours and hours into that. I love your title, Better Than You Think. And every one of those chapters truly is a blessing. And thank you for all the effort you put in that. And I just sense, as I read that book, man, God just kind of speaking through you and just sharing so much wisdom. And thank you for sharing the experiences and things you've learned with the world in that platform as well.
Well, it means a lot to me, buddy. Thank you. And you're awesome. I wish we could keep going on and on, I'm sure, but we got to call it a day here at some point.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Well, look, until next time, everybody, let's go get chiseled.